A big year upcoming in Lexington as the Kentucky Wildcats take the field in 2024. Helping us break down UK this season, our good friend Adam Luckett of Kentucky Sports Radio does a fantastic job talking all things Kentucky Wildcats. Adam, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Happy preseason. Happy scrimmage intel season. Happy we don't know how serious these injuries are season. Just at this point, just kind of itching to get these games up and running. But happy to have football back, no doubt about it.
Yeah, Adam, this time of year, no news is the best news. We'll get into more on that in just a second. Before we look ahead, though, Adam, at this 2024 season, let's look back at 2023 really quickly, kind of set the scene for how we got here in the year that was a season ago. You know, Kentucky goes 7-6, 3-5 in SEC play. On the surface, that doesn't look that bad. But when you look at the way the season started, Kentucky won 5 games in a row and then lost 6 of their last 8, including that tough bowl loss to Clemson. When Kentucky fans look back on the 2023 season, and oh, by the way, I didn't mention what happened after the season with the whole Mark Stoops to Texas A&M connection. That kind of threw a wrench in, or just kind of threw another wrinkle in kind of the madness of the season. But when Kentucky fans and yourself look back at the 2023 season, how will it be remembered in your mind?
I mean, it was a near disaster. I mean, if they don't beat Louisville, I mean, and that Louisville win, they kind of pulled that rabbit out of their hat. I mean, there was not much confidence with the team. There was a lot of locker room drama, scuttlebutt going on at that time, but they were able to kind of rally the troops and get that big win, which was a huge win. That kind of saved the season because you kind of look back, you had Florida ends up being Florida, but for Kentucky, that game always has a certain significance. They just haven't beaten them very often. And they hosted Florida, and it was a crazy environment for a noon kickoff and really just whipped them up and down the field. And so that started a great year. And people were thinking, oh, maybe this is kind of a 9-3, 10-2, top 10-ish team. Second, again, another year where they may finish 2 in the East behind Georgia. They go, and Georgia really lays it on them down there in Athens. That was kind of Carson Beck's coming out party, really. That was that was the first moment where I think people were like, whoa, this guy can play. And then after that, they got caught reeling. They lost to Missouri the very next week. They kind of caught Missouri, I think, at a bad time because that's when they got really rolling on offense. And then the Tennessee series, they lost a close one to Tennessee. It's typically how that series has went. And they just they sputtered. I mean, they went it felt like 6 months without a win. I mean, they went a long time without a win after stacking some wins early in the year. So there was some frustration with kind of how the season went. Then you had, you can't tell last season's story without mentioning the pony up comments. Like after the Georgia game, that upset, I think, a lot of people in the fan base. That was a big talking point there for a few weeks. And then they kind of recovered against Mississippi State to get a nice one on the road, but then they get smoked by Alabama at home. And then they go the next week and lose to South Carolina. So it was a lot of disappointment there in the last 2 months of the season, a lot of bad taste. Now the big win over Louisville, the 10-1 Louisville team, got that because the whole comments was like Stoops can't beat ranked teams all year, and then he went and beat a ranked top 10 Louisville team there at the end. So that was a huge win in the moment for them. And they kind of hey, maybe they're going to kind of save this season, and then maybe they can bounce back, and they're going to have a really good roster coming back next year. But then the A&M stuff pops up that afternoon, that morning, and then it got real serious that evening. And so it was a weird season in a lot of ways, just how it kind of ebbed and flowed from high to low, and then not being able to get out of the low rut and some bad moments. So you enter this year, and I think it's really a prove-it year for the program to the fan and for the fan base. They want to see prove-it year because it's been 2 disappointing years in a row. It's been 2 years where you had an NFL draft pick at quarterback and you came short of preseason expectations. You know, you have this offensive coordinator churn going on. You kind of said, "Hey, we're gonna lean on the pass game. We're gonna build up a pass game." Yada yada yada, and that never really happened. At least you couldn't play winning football playing that way. So it's now like, what are you going to be this year? And so this year is kind of I think a lot is at stake this year because if they have another disappointing season, you could think, well, where are we at with Stoops and what's going on here? Like, where are we at as a program? You feel like you're kind of in a rut. But then also, if you have that breakthrough, then maybe you think you could see another resurgence from Stoops and this coaching staff. So there's a lot, I think, at play this year. In low key, I think Kentucky's one of the more fascinating teams because you look at some of the pieces they have on the roster. It's a pretty good roster. Defensively, could be really good. They've got some weapons at receiver. Brock Vandagriff has got a lot of potential, and the O-line is improved. Like the offensive line was a big weakness. I don't think it's going to be top half of the league, but it's going to be middle of the pack. And so that's going to help them in a lot of ways where it's not going to be a total, I think, weakness of a football team like it was in 2022. So you've got like this nice roster. And I think they made a good offensive coordinator hire, but the schedule is such a brute. Like, and how does it play out? And how do certain specific games play out? And how do you lose them or how do you win them? It's really, I think, going to kind of tell the tale for Kentucky football this year. And to me, the season. It's hard to handicap, not necessarily from a record standpoint, but how each win and each loss is reacted to in real time. And how that plays out is really going to determine, I think, whether the fans and whether Stoops in the program sees it as a success or a failure. I mean, it could go in a lot of different directions.
Adam, on that note, you mentioned the pony up comments. You mentioned the Texas A&M drama at the end of the season or shortly after the season. Mark Stoops enters his 12th year, and I would agree with you. I think it's a huge year in regards to his trajectory there in Lexington. What is the program at this point? And I want to bring up this stat, too, and I'm sure it's the stat you've heard over and over, and people bring it up because I want to – I'm curious what the vibe right now around Mark Stoops is, not just for this year, but the future of Kentucky football. And the stat that comes up, Mark Stoops is just 2-28 at Kentucky against teams that finish with a winning SEC record. Is that something Kentucky fans put a lot of stock in? I think that's a stat that could be maybe too much is made of it because, you're playing the likes of Bama, of Georgia, of some of these upper elites. And I think if we pulled those stats for a lot of other SEC teams, we'd find very similar numbers. But is that something Kentucky fans worry about? And just what's the sense, what's the vibe that you pick up from Big Blue Nation regarding Stoops? Again, not just for this year and how important his 12th season is, but this year and beyond as well there.
Like a lot of those numbers are like losses to Georgia and Alabama. It's top 5 teams you're losing to. And when that stat takes away some of the big wins. Like they've beaten Louisville in some really big moments. Like they beat Lamar Jackson, kind of officially knocked them out of a New Year's Six Bowl. They've really knocked them out of a New Year's Six Bowl twice during his tenure. Those are 2 of his bigger wins, and some of the bowl wins they've had, Penn State, 2018 Citrus Bowl. So he takes some of that away. He doesn't have like the signature top 5 win, right? Like he doesn't have what Rich Brooks had. Beating LSU #1 at home the year LSU won the national title in 2007. He doesn't have that win. But I don't think Kentucky fans are super hung up on that. I think some of the bigger issues is just like the losing to South Carolina, Missouri, and Vanderbilt all at home in the last 3 years is a big deal. Like that's a frustrating, I think, thing for Kentucky fans to swallow. And then how the Tennessee series has played out when you've lost a lot of close games in that series. Really, he should probably be right at 500 against Tennessee. And really, he's 2-9. I guess. So he should be 4-5, 5-4. Just every close game except one has gone Tennessee's way. So I think those were the big things. And right now, I think a large chunk of the fan base, they want to know, like, are you in or are you out? Like, what's the deal here? There was the complaints about, the NIL situation that was released in August. There was him trying to leave for A&M. And it's an off season where they kind of laid low and not really or ramped up the hype machine like they had the last 2 years with Leary and Levis. So it's like, do you really want to be here, and are you really committed to like getting this program through this stage and to like that next step you got to get to, or are you done? Like, which one are you? Are you riding with us or not? And that's kind of where I think fan base is, and it's kind of like in a weird way the program's in a holding pattern. Like he's not going to get fired, and he's not on the hot seat. And I don't even think fans want him to go. But it's just like, what's the deal here? And there's an alum sitting out there, John Summerall, who's a high-profile candidate potentially that they could replace if he ever tried to step away. So I think in the back of a lot of people's minds here, it's like, well, I don't want to ruin our opportunity to go hire this guy either. So, like, what are we doing here? And that's why this season, I just think there's so much at stake. I think for Stoops, it's like, do you want to keep doing this? Do you want to keep pushing through? or if you had, are you really what you're saying and what you've said? What are your statements true that you're just like, is this just too much? Like we've heard a lot of coaches complain about, everything
Mhm.
they have to do now, or do you get, or is Brock Vandagriff good and you catch? Do you feel like you got maybe lightning in a bottle and you can make a run at this thing in the next 3 years? And so I think a lot of that's going to determine what that happens this season,
Mhm.
and so that's why it's really a fascinating season in a lot of ways.
Adam, speaking of Brock Vandagriff, let's deep dive into the Kentucky Wildcats this season. We'll start on the offensive side of the football. Bush Hamden takes over as the offensive coordinator, and Georgia transfer Brock Vandagriff, his era as QB1 begins. At the running back position, big news dropping as of this morning when you and I were chatting. Chip Traynum, the Ohio State transfer, is expected to be RB1, I believe, but an injured hand looks like it's going to keep him out 3 to 4 weeks, could potentially miss the first couple of weeks of the season, which includes that big week 2 matchup against South Carolina. Demi Sumo Karngbe returns. Who else steps up in that running back room? I know was a big question. At the outside, you mentioned them. Barryon Brown, Dane Key. They lead the wide receiver. I think if they're consistent, could be two of the best or one of the best duos in the SEC when it comes to electric wide receivers. Jamari Macklin, I thought, was an underrated transfer pickup from North Texas. He joins on the outside. You've got Jordan Dingle back at tight end, who I think is a weapon. And you mentioned the offensive line. 4 of 5 are back within that group. You got to get back to that big blue wall culture, leaning on people, pushing people around. But as you mentioned, the offensive line, with that much experience and the talent you brought in, should be improved. So when you look at this Kentucky offense, Adam, what are you expecting from Bush Hamden, Brock Vandagriff, and the rest of that crew this season?
It's going to look different than the last 3 years in that it's still, I mean, if you want to classify it as pro style, you can, but it's not going to be necessarily the under center. It's not going to be huddling, and there's going to be like actual zone read, and there's going to be an emphasis on running the quarterback, which they have not done at all the last 2 years. So that alone is going to make it look a lot different, and they're going to play. They're going to play faster, but they're not necessarily going to be like they're not going to be top half of the league probably in plays per game, but they are going to play faster, and that was a huge criticism for the offense last year. I think offensively, a lot of it's going to be like they want to be a run first offense. They want to be able to run the ball efficiently, play action pass, and get the playmakers the ball. But how they look running the ball could be a little unorthodox this year because of just the state of the running back room. And this was even true, I think, before the Chip Traynum news dropped on Tuesday, August 13th, that he has a broken hand. He's going to be out a few weeks. Sound like he's going to miss a couple games. And so what does that look like? I think QB run, you've heard that talk about a lot. Like they're going to run the quarterback. Brock Vandagriff's going to run the ball. They brought in Rutgers transfer Gavin Wimsatt. Now, I'm still skeptical about how big of a role he's going to have, but he's the backup quarterback, and they have pretty much a Wildcat quarterback package for him. Like he ran for 11 touchdowns last year at Rutgers, right at 500 yards. Had a good season running the football. So he's going to have a run game role. We've seen Barryon Brown, and when he gets the ball in his hands on kickoff return, he was very good as like on jet sweeps last year. Like he's going to be a part of the offense. So they're going to kind of have this, I would say, kind of an unorthodox running game, but that's going to be a main emphasis on offense. Mark Stoops has talked about it off season, more physical up front, getting to moving people. Offensive line's got to do better. And so I think they're going to be improved running the football. I don't know how really good they can get, but a lot of that is let's get good at running ball, and that's where these explosive plays are going to come, where we can get Brown and Key and some of our other weapons that can be explosive. And Kentucky's real explosive last year. 50-yard plays. Only LSU had as many 50-plus yard plays as Kentucky's offense last season. And Kentucky was dead last in total plays in the league. So they were produced. They were I kind of say they were kind of like the 190 hitter who's 38 home runs. Like, they would be an 0 for 21 stretch, but you never know when that 3 for 10 stretch was coming with two 3-run shots and a 2-run double. So at some point, like they were gonna help you score, but there was times when they really hurt the football team because of their inability to move to consistently stay ahead of the chains and keep the defense off the field and play complementary football and all those things. So I think they're going to be able to play more complementary football this year. They're going to have still that explosive play potential, but I just don't know how good they can be on a down-to-down basis because they don't have that bell cow. The offensive line isn't a strength, and there's a lot of buttons I think Bush Hamden is going to have to push correctly about when and how to run the quarterback, how to use that. If you got like this Wildcat wrinkle package, when to kind of play Wimsatt, when to not play him, how to use Barry and Brown in the run game, how to use the short pass game as an extension of the run game, where in the past it's been simple, hey, Ray Davis, hey, Chris Rodriguez, here's the football, go get us 5 yards. They don't have that this year. And so how do they kind of figure that out? They're paying Hamden over $1 million, and a lot's going to be on him to kind of figure all of that out with a brand new starting quarterback and a brand new offense that's going to have like 5 first-year transfers starting.
Adam, let's move to the defensive side of the football. This is a really exciting facet of the game for Kentucky. You look at last year, second against the run in the SEC last season, allowed 113.1 yards per game. And you return a lot that helped to establish that mark. Octavius Oxendine, Deion Walker, who we're all familiar with, Keyshawn Silver, all return up front. J.J. Weaver, De'Eric Jackson are back at linebacker. And oh, by the way, you had Georgia transfer Jamon Dumas Johnson, who I think could be a star in this league at Kentucky at the linebacker spot. Maxwell Hairston back is one of the best DBs in the conference. Alex Afari Jr., Zion Childress, Jordan Lovett, they're all back in the secondary amongst a host of others. And really, Adam, again, you look at this group, I feel like it should be the strength of the team. Brad White's got another fantastic crop of players yet again, and it should be one of the best defenses in the SEC, I think, when, you look at the roster and the top to bottom talent. So, Adam, when you look at this defense, what are you expecting from Kentucky on the defensive side of the football this season?
Yeah, I think it's expected to be a strength of the team. And kind of the storyline emerging here is that this looks like the second best defense of the Stoops era, potentially up there with that 2018 unit. I think you look at the star power. I think that's a lot what's driving that. Deion Walker's potential All-American. Maxwell Hairston is one of the best returning cornerbacks in the SEC. Pop Dumas Johnson and De'Eric Jackson together at linebacker. That's one of the best duos, I think, in all of college football. Their defensive line has depth and experience surrounding Walker. Their secondary has much improved depth over last year, where there's some unproven parts of the secondary, but they have more options. I think if an injury or if someone struggles where they didn't last year, and I think lack of depth really caught up to them in the secondary, and that was a big part of their problems, and specifically pass defense. You mentioned the rushing numbers, but the pass defense numbers were really bad, especially from an efficiency and completion percentage allowed. They went out of their way to say, hey, we're going to play more man coverage this year, rather than some of the soft zone stuff we've seen from them. I think a lot of that last year was to kind of protect their secondary. I think they feel better about their secondary. I think Max Harrison has a lot to do with that. The potential he can be is maybe a lockdown guy there on the outside. And so defensively, the expectations are pretty high. Like, the expectation is a real big bounce back season and potentially have a top 15 defense over there, which puts them in the top, 5 or so in the SEC. And to be a unit that can really go out and stop people and can give some offenses some problems. Now, you look at the offense they're going to face, there's some really, really good quarterbacks. And so the pass defense is going to get tested early and often. So we're going to find out soon what they have. But the pieces, depth, I think, are in place. And some of the just high-level players, I think, at all 3 levels of the defense are really going to allow them to have a really good season. Now, they have to go out and do it and create stops and turnovers and all of that. But you look at just the individual players they have and White's track record of producing some consistently good defenses at Kentucky. I think the ceiling's pretty high for that group, but I also think the floor's pretty high too. So they're going to have a good year one way or the other on defense. Just how good can they be is kind of the big question.
Adam, let's do the special teams. Talk about the specialists really quickly. Alex Rayner back at kicker. He was 10 of 11 on field goals a season ago. Wilson Berry returns at punter. And maybe the most notable when it comes to specialists, Barryon Brown. You mentioned him earlier. Back as the return man. He led college football a season ago with 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns. We saw him in the bowl game against Clemson, just an electric factory when it comes to kickoff returns and being on special teams. Talk about special teams a bit. Do you feel like, and again, in a season like this for Kentucky and really for anybody, we've seen it in the SEC before, special teams is a facet we don't pay all that much attention to, but it can flip a game on its head. So
yeah.
Is there anything to be excited about when it comes to Kentucky special teams this year?
Brown in general can win them a game. Like, he won them the Louisville game with a kick return. And then Ole Miss, if he doesn't get tripped by a teammate 2 years ago, he probably wins them that game down there he had 2 I believe big kick returns, one of them should have scored, and he got tripped on by his own teammate. So he can win them a game. I think at kicker, they have someone they feel really confident in, Alex Rayner, who's kind of like has a knack since he's been at Georgia. He was a Georgia Southern transfer. Anything 45 and in, he's pretty much automatic. Outside of that, it's pretty iffy. But you get in the red zone or right outside the red zone, you feel pretty good about getting 3 points with him in there. And he was really consistent last year. Punter is where they really struggled. They're in the hundreds in net punting average. They really struggled punting-wise. And that really hurt them field position-wise. Defensively, average starting field position was not good. It was in the 90s or hundreds nationally. They went out and got UT Martin transfer Aiden Laros. Aiden Laros was FCS All-American last year, averaged 47 yards per punt, which was like 10 yards better than what Barry averaged last year. And this guy played Georgia last year and was incredible. Like, was hitting 60-yard bombs, was wedging it inside the 5 from around midfield. Like, he has a chance to be a real game changer from a hidden yardage field position standpoint for them. And when Kentucky had their best defense in 2018, they had the Ray Guy winner at punter. In an Iowa football way, they were able to dominate field position, and then they allowed the good defense to really eat. And I think that could play out this year. I think Laros is kind of a sneaky, important add for Kentucky because punting has been a weakness really since Max Duffy left campus after the 2019 season. And so if you get a high-level punting again, that I think changes things, especially when you consider the context of how Mark Stoops wants to play football. Complementary football, offense, help out the defense, ball control on offense, put defense in the good spots, make teams earn points by driving it down the field, and make them go on 12, 14-play scoring drives. That's harder to do if they're starting on the own 40. But if you're starting inside their 20, that's a lot easier to accomplish. And I think Laros has got a sneaky chance to be really good. And just from it's the most well-rounded, I think, special teams unit Stoops has had. They've had a clear weakness almost every year on special teams, whether it's punting, kicker, or not much pop in the return game. They have all three this year. They've got an electric returner. They've got a consistent, proven veteran field goal kicker who may not be someone you trust from 50, but inside of 40, you feel really good about him, which in college football, that's a weapon. And then they got a punter who looks like the real deal. So you add all those together, that can make a big difference in a lot of ball games, especially when you look at Kentucky. They're going to play in a lot of close games. So if you get that third phase edge, that can add a win or win and a half sometimes. And that's since they've hired Jay Boulware, their new special teams coordinator, they've made some real strides, and they've got a unit here that has got a chance to be really, really, really good, I think. And that could make a difference for them in a big way, especially if the offense struggles in any regard and it becomes a defense and special teams game. They're going to have a chance, I think, to win a lot of those games because a good kicking game and a good defense is going to let them hang around.
So, Adam, 15 starters are back for the Cats this season, 6 on offense, 9 on defense. As we take a look at the 2024 schedule, a little bit different than years past, Adam, because typically we've seen Kentucky first 3-4 weeks have a lot of these non-conference games, be able to get off to a 3-0, 4-0 start. You do open up with Southern Miss, which is an interesting non-conference game. Southern Miss is a really proud football program. Kentucky should be fine in that one. But week 2, it gets going. It gets real quick. Sure. You've got South Carolina coming to Lexington. And I think that's one that is you mentioned the losing streak to Shane Beamer and company. I think you and I talked about this in Dallas at SEC Media Days. Mark Stoops can't lose to Shane Beamer again. It just can't happen.
Yeah.
So you've got that one. You've got Georgia coming to town, Ohio, at Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, at Florida. Really big game for both sides. Auburn coming to town as well, end of October. You're at Tennessee to kick off November. Murray State at Texas, and then Louisville at home. So I mentioned some of the road trips at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Texas, at Florida. But it's the SEC. You got to love the schedule. When you take a look at them at the 2024 slate, what jumps out to you specifically?
Yeah, I think 8 home games immediately jumps out when you look at the schedule. But the 4 road games look very, very, like it's going to be very hard to win one of those. Like they're going to be dogs, probably a touchdown plus dog in all of those games. So the season, and the 2 of those are potential national title contenders. Well, not 2 of them, but 3 of the road games. 4th Florida, I was lumping Georgia in that group. And so you look at, like, the home slate is really important to me. Like, you got to protect home field. You got to win home games. Kentucky, in their last 10 home games against SEC and Louisville, so power conference competition, they're 3-7. They haven't won home games. Like, they've been better on the road. And so they haven't won home games. So really the season kind of, to me, comes down to, like, it comes down to really the South Carolina, the Auburn, and the Louisville games at home. Like, you probably need to win all 3 of those. Bare minimum, you got to win 2 or 3. And so you got to win some home games this year. That's really, really important. South Carolina, obviously, like, that is the game, like, the fan base could jump off. They're going to show some patience, I think, especially when this early part of the schedule, Georgia week 3, everyone knows how good Ole Miss is. But you lose to South Carolina, that's really going to bring out a lot of criticism if they lose that game. It feels like a must-win game from Kentucky's side. And I know it's really important on that other side too. And so they got to find a way to win that one. But I will say this for Stoops, that's typically one of the better games they play all year is that SEC opener. That's how they've beaten Florida in recent years. When they started that run against South Carolina, like, a lot of those games were the first SEC games. So they've had a lot of success in these SEC openers, and they need that to continue, because if that allows them, one, that's going to be a big win for at home. Mentioned, gets the fan base a nice win early, and then it allows you to kind of absorb what could be a tough couple weeks before that huge stretch. We got Vandy at home October 12th. Florida at Florida October 19th, Auburn October 26th before going to Tennessee. That's a huge stretch there, but you need to have that South Carolina win, get there. But really the season comes down to the home games. You got to win some home games. They win some home games, there's going to be some good positivity building into as the season progresses, and then you have a chance to potentially play spoiler late in the year, whether it be against Texas or Tennessee or maybe even Louisville again if they're kind of flirting with that ACC race.
So, Adam, I know we talked about Mark Stoops earlier, but I want to go back to that really quickly because you mentioned how important this year is, and I just want to, dive into that more, because it does feel like this Kentucky program is sort of at a fork in the road, if you will, where it's like, what are you going to be, right? Especially in the new SEC, you add Texas and Oklahoma, 12-team college football playoff. Where does Kentucky fit in there? Is Kentucky a team? Is Kentucky a program that looks like they can be, a 7 to 8, 8 to 9 win per year program and kind of be knocking on the door of the playoff? Or are we going to go back to old Kentucky? Again, I think these are questions that will be answered based off of this year. And just, because again, it feels like we're sort of at an inflection point where it's, what is Kentucky football under Mark Stoops? Is that fair to say? Because again, in previous years, you've seen Kentucky get to that 9 or 10 win mark, and that would have put them probably squarely in the playoff, but a couple disappointing years in a row. It feels like if they do that for a third consecutive year, we're trending the wrong way, and it may be time for change. Is that too bold to say? And just how do you view Mark Stoops, the trajectory in Lexington, how important this season is for that?
I think when you talk about Mark Stoops and just his overall body of work, there's some knowns. Like, they're consistently, I think, building top 25-ish rosters at Kentucky, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. Their NIL is in a good space. I wouldn't say it's top echelon of the league, but it's in a good space right now. They're getting players, both in the portal and through the high school ranks. They're getting talented players. Mark Stoops has proven that Kentucky, they're a high-floor program. They roll out of bed and go 7-5 now. I mean, it's a decade of them going 7-5. So I think you can reasonably expect that to continue. But there is worries. Like, I think you just look around to some of their peers are kind of on the rise. Tennessee is one. Missouri right now, even though they're not playing Missouri every year anymore. And then it was looking like South Carolina was until they had that rough year last year. And then Louisville with Braum is kind of on the rise. So then it's like, hey, what are we doing? We kind of feel like maybe we're going down a little bit. So I think when you tell the Stoops story, it's going to be he established a high floor here, and that was no like easy feat. Like, that was a true accomplishment. But it's like, can you level up and get us to that 10-2 season? Because that's really what everyone's asking right now. I think when you kind of look at Kentucky, the hard part has been you've looked at Tennessee and Missouri here recently in the last 2 years, really, right? Like they both had a year where they were in the playoff hunt, and really they would have been in the 12-team playoff, both of those teams. Tennessee would have been in, Missouri would have been in if the 12 team was here. So Kentucky is thinking we've had 2 of those years, but we weren't good enough to get into the playoff. We 9-3 probably doesn't get us in. Can we get to 10-2 and make it when the stars align? And that's what everyone's asking. And so that's kind of where we are. And then I think this year, I think Stoops he doesn't need to prove, but it would help everyone if he comes out and shows that like Kentucky is really locked in, ready to go, it's not sloppy, and is really pushing to get to this next level. And it's upsets and wins and looks kind of like a spicy underdog is the way I would put that. And that they haven't looked like that at times in the last couple of years. They've lost some of their edge. I think Mark Stoops would even say that. They've got to get some of that back. So can they get that back, and can they get that to the next level? I think Brock Vandagriff is a big component in all of this. Like, I think he can kind of change things if that's a hit for them out of the portal, because they're going to have him for 2 years. And then if he's good next year, you can kind of head into 2025 like, this is our piece. We're loading up this year. Let's go after it. Let's chase it. And then I think that would fix a lot of issues if they just can get some good quarterback play. But if not, if it's a year where you have a really good defense and you kind of middle around 7-5, you lose a home game you're not supposed to lose, 3 7-5s in a row. It's just kind of like, where are we going? Where are we headed? We all know that what Stoops has done in the long term is impressive, but keep doing the same thing over and over again. At some point, there's going to be some wanting change involved. And I think it's potentially from Stoops in too. And so just how the season plays out really is going to tell a lot. And I think how Vandagriff plays. Like if you give me the record in heading into, let's say, November 16th, and I have Vandagriff stats like at my disposal, I think I could tell you like what direction they're going. But if I don't, I have to see these games play out. So I think we're going to kind of know where that arrow is trending come November. But you got to play the games first, and it's a front-loaded schedule in a lot of ways. And so how they handle that, because it was different than the last couple of years where they've kind of had a backloaded schedule. And so, yeah, to me, like, they're one of the more fascinating teams just because where Stoops is, because he's not hot seat territory at all. They're not going to try to fire him, but there is some angst, I think, and some frustration being built, not only from like the fans, but I think from inside the football building too. Just point to some of his comments about NIL and where Kentucky is and trying to go to A&M, like all of that's there. So like, how much longer would he want to stay here and really keep pushing this forward? I think it's fair to ask.
So, Adam, in closing, you mentioned Brock Vandagriff and some of the keys to the season. And I'm someone, admittedly, Adam, I'm a little bit higher on Kentucky, I feel like, than some others. I've got the Cats 8-4. I mean, you go through their schedule, and I was surprised to be as high on Kentucky as I was. But you mentioned, you look at the roster, and I think this is a roster good enough to do it. If you talk about real, true college football playoff dark horses, I mean, listen, a lot would have to happen. I'm not penciling Kentucky in, but, I mean, is it impossible? No. So when you look at this season, expectations, I mean, is there even any chatter for maybe making a run at a 12-team playoff? And for Kentucky, let's say, to win 8 or more games, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like 8-4 or better would signal that positive trajectory would be considered a success at Kentucky. What has to click for the Cats to get to that point?
I think 8-4 would be considered a big success. I think the fans realize the gauntlet that's about to take place. They realize how tough it's going to be. And that Kentucky's not going to expect to be in that playoff hunt every year. But they want to know, like, when they have it lined up, that they can go make a run. I think the disappointing part, like, you look at 2022, that was the year in the playoff era. You had that type of schedule. You should make the playoff with what you had. But that didn't happen. So they want to be able, when the stars align, to be able to go do it. And that's really what they're asking. The stars probably aren't going to align this year because of the schedule. And I think most people realize that. I think 8-4 would be a really positive step. I think 7-5 could be seen as a success if it happens, if you beat the right teams and the right players have big seasons. I think it's really important, no matter what happens this year, that Vandagriff looks like a guy that can be one of the better SEC quarterbacks going into 2025. They need to get good quarterback play, especially with what they're going to have to rebuild on defense. But again, I point back to winning those home games. It's really important. And then continuing that streak against Louisville is really important. Those are, I would say, the two. Like getting some home wins, whether it's against, you have to beat South Carolina feels like kind of a must win. So that one, if you could beat Auburn, I think would be seen as a big home win there in October. And then you beat Louisville. If you get those, some big home wins would go a long way. And then if you see some really positive signs from Brock Vandagriff that he can really turn into something, I think that is the path to the approval rating being strong and people being excited about where the program is heading into next season. But they got to go out and do it, and we'll see if they can. Whereas I think they could go a 7-5 or an 8-4 even, but if it's a year where the offense really labors and the defense is just awesome, but then like the defense, they're going to fall back. They're not going to stay at that level. Then that I could see some frustration creeping in within the fan base there. So it's not just like what the record is. It's like how they get there is really important, I think, in all of this. And what it looks like going into next season is really important.
Adam Luckett, Kentucky Sports Radio, does a fantastic job. I also want to mention he is the host of the podcast 11 Personnel, so he's all over the place. Adam, let folks know where they can check out all your work.
Yeah, Adam Luckett, KSR on Twitter, 11 Personnel Podcast, me and Nick Roush. Believe we're going twice a week once the season gets started. So check us out at the KSR YouTube channel, wherever podcasts are found. And then KentuckySportsRadio.com and KSRPlus.com is our subscription site. Dropping intel, recruiting nuggets, all of that good stuff on our message board there. We got a nice growing Kentucky fan community there. So come check us out over there at KSR Plus as well as Kentucky Sports Radio. And that's where you find me. Not hard to track down. Like Deion Sanders says, I ain't hard to find.
Adam, appreciate you taking the time, man. Let's definitely do it again soon.
Anytime, brother.